The town slumbered, whispering pines, a fitting name. Wind howled through the pines, a mournful, lonely sound. Shadows stretched long and gnarled, twisting familiar shapes into menacing phantoms. Moonlight, pale and thin, did little to pierce the darkness. It clung to the trees, to the ramshackle houses, to the secrets the town held close. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of pine needles and damp earth. A chill ran through the air, a harbinger of the coming autumn. But this was more than the usual autumn chill. This was a primal cold, seeping from the ground itself. A cold that spoke of ancient things, best left undisturbed. The silence was broken only by the wind and the occasional hoot of an owl. But beneath the surface, a tension throbbed, an unspoken fear. The residents of Whispering Pines knew instinctively that they were not alone. Something lurked in the shadows, something ancient and hungry. Sarah had arrived in Whispering Pines only a week ago. She sought solace, a refuge from the city's clamour. The town, nestled in the heart of the mountains, promised peace, tranquility. Her little cottage at the edge of the woods seemed idyllic, a place to heal, to forget. But something was off. The townsfolk, though outwardly friendly, seemed wary of her. Their smiles didn't reach their eyes, their gazes lingered a beat too long, filled with a mixture of pity and fear. They spoke in hushed tones, their conversations ending abruptly when she drew near. Sarah tried to shake off the feeling. It was her imagination, she told herself, the stress of the move, the strangeness of a new place. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted, a sense that something was amiss in Whispering Pines. Days turned into nights. The feeling of unease lingered, growing stronger. Animals began to disappear. Pets vanished from their yards. Livestock went missing from their pens, leaving behind only shredded fences and bloodstains on the ground. Whispers of a large predator spread through the town. A bear, some said. A mountain lion, others whispered. But Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. These explanations felt too easy, too mundane. The fear in the townspeople's eyes spoke of something more, something monstrous. One night, Sarah awoke to a blood-curdling scream. It was cut short, ending in a strangled gasp. Silence descended once more, heavy and suffocating. She lay in bed, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible had just transpired. The next morning, Sarah ventured into town, drawn by an inexplicable pull. The townsfolk were gathered in the town square, their faces grim. They spoke in hushed tones, their words reaching Sarah in fragments.
Savage attack. Unrecognizable. The beast of Whispering Pines.
An old woman, her face etched with worry, caught Sarah's eye.
"It's happening again," she muttered, more to herself than to Sarah. "The curse. It's back."
Before Sarah could inquire further, the woman turned away, hobbling off down the street, her eyes filled with a deep, ancient fear. Intrigued and terrified in equal measure, Sarah decided to find out more. She visited the town library, a dusty, forgotten-looking building on the outskirts of town. The librarian, a wizened old man with thick glasses, eyed her with suspicion.
I'm looking for information about the history of Whispering Pines. Anything about a curse?
The librarian stiffened.
There's no curse?
His voice was a dry rasp.
Just foolish stories.
But Sarah noticed his hands trembling as he straightened a pile of books. She pressed on.
I'd still like to see what you have.
The librarian hesitated, then sighed.
Very well.
He led her to a back room and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound book from a locked cabinet.
This is all we have?
The book was ancient, its pages filled with faded ink and strange symbols. Sarah's fingers trembled as she opened it. The pages smelled of dust and decay, and she felt a strange energy emanating from them. It was the town's history, written in a language she couldn't understand. But scattered throughout the text were illustrations, illustrations that made her blood run cold. The illustrations depicted a creature of nightmares, a hulking beast with razor-sharp claws and glowing red eyes, a werewolf. The book spoke of an ancient pact, a deal with a dark entity that had cursed the town of Whispering Pines. For generations, the creature had terrorized the townsfolk, preying on their fear and despair.
The strange occurrences, the fear in the townspeople's eyes, the whispers of a curse, it all makes sense now.
The ancient werewolf was real, and it had returned to Whispering Pines. She had to warn the town. They needed to know what they were dealing with. But as she looked around the library, a chilling thought struck her. The librarian was gone, and the door was locked from the outside.
Trapped in the library, I watched as the sun began to set. The full moon, round and blood red, rose in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the town. The air grew thick with anticipation, with a palpable sense of dread. The beast was coming.
Suddenly, a blood-curdling howl split the night. It was close, too close. The werewolf was here in Whispering Pines. Sarah could hear the sounds of chaos erupting in the town. Screams, the crashing of wood, the desperate barking of dogs.
I had to do something. I had to help, but I was trapped, helpless. I pounded on the library door, but it wouldn't budge. I was a prisoner in my own nightmare.
Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. An eerie silence descended upon the town. Sarah held her breath, listening intently. She could hear footsteps approaching the library. Heavy, deliberate footsteps.
The doorknob rattled violently. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest.
The window shattered, sending shards of glass flying across the room. A monstrous figure leaped through the broken window, landing gracefully on the floor. The werewolf stood before her, its eyes glowing like hot coals. Its breath steamed in the cold air, carrying the stench of blood and decay.
I stared into its eyes, paralyzed with fear. This was it. This was how I died.
But the werewolf hesitated. It tilted its head, sniffing the air. It took a step closer to Sarah, its hot breath washing over her face. She closed her eyes, bracing for the end. But it never came.
Instead, the werewolf let out a low growl, a sound filled with frustration and sadness. It turned away from me and padded towards the broken window. It paused, looking back at me one last time. Then, with a final mournful howl, it leaped out the window and disappeared into the night.
Sarah slumped to the ground, her body trembling with shock. She had been spared, but why? And what had happened to the townspeople? The next morning, the library door swung open. The librarian stood there, his face pale and drawn. He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and fear.
You're alive, but the others...
His voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah knew, without asking, that the werewolf had claimed more victims. The curse of Whispering Pines lived on.
As I stepped out of the library and into the bright morning sun, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The werewolf was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and I, Sarah, the newcomer, was somehow caught in the middle of it all. The fight for Whispering Pines had just begun.